my friends, even though I'm too early by 1 minute. And our topic today will be kind of a response to what I heard today, which is that the UK online safety bill actually passed Parliament now and is about to be signed by King Charles. So when that happens, then it becomes law, and then it's the beginning of getting zucked. I actually didn't think we would get here. I thought maybe, because of the opposition to it, that we would actually get beyond it, but that's not happening here. This is really crazy. So welcome, my friends. We're going to talk about that in the next few minutes. We are live on Rumble, and we are also on YouTube. Those are the only two platforms where I'm going live. And happy to be here, my friends. And I put the chat there from YouTube, so anybody coming later can see what was discussed in chat. So anyway, you can see that. The format, as usual, is that I talk for 30 minutes on the given topic, and then we go for an hour of Q&A, and you can ask anything. We can go deviate or talk about the same topic, whatever you guys feel like, and we'll continue on. So anyway, the tendency of the Five Eyes is to, it's really funny, the Five Eyes is supposed to represent the 5 English-speaking countries, and they're supposed to be like very, very tight, and yet they're supposed to represent also democracy. And yet, as you see in real life, that those countries are really, really intent on government control in a big way, almost like China. You can see the ex-prime minister of New Zealand, actually boasting about the fact that censorship was actually needed in New Zealand because free speech is like the enemy. So yeah, that's the kind of thinking that you find everywhere, and it's and you see it everywhere. You see it in Canada, you see it in the U.S. obviously, and you see it in the U.K. And yeah, it's just the crazy attitude of government that they actually have a role to curtail free speech and to say that some speech is freer than others. And this is an extension of that, and it's really, really bothersome, because if you actually understand the implications of this, it's and this is the first wave. This is really disturbing because of what it really means. Now, the online safety bill, it's kind of a big law. There's some other stuff in there. So it's kind of broad, so it affects other things. But one of the things that we need to be concerned about is the fact that in it includes the wording to research technology to allow breaking of end-to-end encryption, really. And so, and how do you do that? And, it's still vague in there. So there's a time period here where there's going to be research. If this is not going to be like implemented immediately, there's going to be a few steps in here. And there may be a ramp-up period, and technology has to be created. It's not going to be automatic that they can actually put this to practice, and the law actually considers that. So it's not going to be automatic that there's regulations. This is going to be accompanied by actual regulations how to implement this, and that's not here yet, but that's going to be developed over time. And to imagine that this would actually be happening in the UK, it's kind of a precursor to what could happen in the US. And it's really, really bothersome here. So one of the things that they're trying to do here is say, okay, we want to pass the burden of content scanning to the platforms, meaning they want to make sure that the platforms come up with their own way of doing basically content scanning. So, and this will apply to Signal, it will apply to Session, it will apply to Briar or whatever end-to-end encrypted app is there. It will apply also to Facebook. It will apply to the OS like Google, Android. It will apply to iOS. And iOS already has a way of handling this, so I guess the spying already built into your Zucking iPhone. So, so you know, as far as iOS is concerned, they can actually handle this now. So this is not something that they have to be too concerned about. The problem is the others and how it will actually be implemented. So basically, to just give you a sense of what Apple has done and what others might do here, so Google might follow here as well, is that they've created an infrastructure so that the platform, the big tech platform, whichever it is able to scan content that they deem to be bad content, evil or illegal content. So, of course, the actual specific one that is targeted by the wording is child exploitation and that kind of media. So the problem is, and this is the part that just everyone misses this, is that when you build in these systems for reviewing content, there cannot be a way to say that the only content that you can read would be child exploitation content. How do you do that? Because you don't know what content to review, so you have to review everything. And then in the process of review, when you say, oh, this is banned content, so we should filter this out ahead of somebody seeing it, because if somebody sees it, then they'll report us to the government, and then the government will fine us and will put the liability on us. And and this has already happened in the EU with other things, and they're going to say, okay, big tech platform, you're going to be fined in the billions for doing this. And Apple is one that said, well, you said that we should filter out CSAM, so we're going to do it. So then Apple will be forced to start implementing this. As you know, they have the technology in there, they put it aside, it's on hold. Well, now they have to put it out of hold, but it doesn't really matter. And this is really the crazy part of the situation, is that the technology has always been there since iOS 15, or no, iOS no, it's been around since 13. So since iPhone 10. So now the capability for AI scanning, which is the one that Apple's doing, AI scanning, AI-based scanning, is already in the hardware. And then recently they've already also added that capability to Mac OS. So they can do content scanning, and their excuse is that, as I said in the video, is they'll justify the privacy by saying, well, no human being will review it, only AI. Okay, and so that's the cover. The AI will review it, no human will review it. Now, not every company has the capability for AI to review it, so then they have to put in some infrastructure to review it on the server sides. For example, how does somebody, if Signal, of course, says they'll move out of the EU, of the UK, if they won't allow their platform to be in the UK if this kind of thing happens. But let's just say, let's pick a platform. Let's say it's Telegram, and Telegram is now going to be responsible for making sure that there's no banned content on their platform, even as they claim to have encryption, and some of it is end-to-end encryption. Not everything on Telegram is end-to-end encryption. Same with WhatsApp. Not everything is end-to-end encryption. Group stuff is not. So if the content is on their platform, whether it's end-to-end or not, they have to scan it. They don't have hardware to do the scanning on device. Unlike Apple made a hardware. Apple can scan on device. There's no facility for a platform like WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram to scan on device, which means they have to scan at the server. How did they do that? The only way to do scanning at the server is to put basically a remote access Trojan. Or they just say, well, we can't do this, so we'll take the risk or something else. I don't know. This is the kind of craziness that these officials are putting in. And basically, it's an intent to kill end-to-end encryption. This is just a roundabout way to say, well, we want to spy on you, so we're gonna go, require you to do things that cannot be done with end-to-end encryption. So the only solution would be to destroy end-to-end encryption. Either that or they leave the country. Now, what about if every country is on this? So the EU, of course, has something similar that's going on. Now, if the EU and the UK and then the US follows and then Australia and then New Zealand, now, a platform's not going to be able to survive unless they start following these rules. And basically, it's going to be like China. Now, let me just kind of review it. China, of course, has access to. There's no such thing as end-to-end encryption in China. So, the government can review everything, and they're not even allowed to use VPNs in China. Not allowed to use VPNs. So all the content is scannable in China. So what's going to happen here? Now, like I said, it's not going to happen immediately because it's country by country. But let's move on like 5 years from now, and suddenly every country has said, okay, we're going to ban. We're not going to ban end-to-end encryption. We're just going to say you're now liable for the content that's posted in your platform, and so solve it. And the solution will be either client-side scanning with AI or outright elimination of end-to-end encryption with server-side scanning, one of the two. They're not even dictating what the method is because they just want to destroy the whole infrastructure. No, there is no E2E, there is no end-to-end encryption in China. How do they do that? You can't even run a VPN in China. It's illegal to do VPNs. It's illegal to use Tor in China. These are all illegal moves. So, yeah, how are you going to do it in China? It's crazy, crazy stuff. So anyway, of course, we actually have a way out of this. It's not that's really the amusing thing about all this that they do. This really is going to affect just the normies because they're not going to, I hope that companies like, Session and Briar and Signal and so on, I hope they don't eliminate end-to-end encryption or come up with a version that, that has it and some versions don't have it. But what will be the solution? Well, I told you already there's a solution, and that's, of course, if you're using, as long as the platform itself is not doing some kind of scanning. So for example, Session is not going to do any scanning because who are you going to sue? So some of these companies, because they're open source, there's not entities that you can sue. Signal as an entity, there's a Signal Foundation, but some of the stuff is like Jammy, and some of these are GNU. They're open source communities. There's not one entity that's actually responsible. So how do you sue them? So open source communities. So if you're using an open source product, it's open source, so you can do anything you want. So if they put in, let's just talk, for a moment about Android here. Let's just say that the government says, oh, you have to put some sort of scanning mechanism inside, some sort of content scanning inside Android. As you all know, Android is open source. So how do you even implement that? Because of course, if they put it in, and I doubt if they can even do that, but if they put it in, then obviously guys like us will remove it. It's open source. If it's open source, you can't just keep it there. We can remove everything or anything in open source because you can fork it and create another copy without it. So it's kind of pointless to put it in. So especially if it affects, some proprietary technology like Tensor and Google. Like Apple isn't going to reveal how they do, AI client-side scanning that's using the neural engine. They're not going to reveal that. So if that ever comes to pass, then open source, of course, will prevail, and then all of us will move to open source. So if you're in the UK, start really considering moving to an open source OS for your computers. Move to Linux. Do it immediately, because you're going to be zucked. So might as well get prepped for it and make sure that you're on an open source operating system for everything, including the apps you use. So instead of using Microsoft Office, dump Microsoft Office, use LibreOffice. Use open source stuff. I use LibreOffice. I don't use Microsoft Office. I don't use anything that's that's not open source. With some exceptions, like for editing video, but there's nothing for me that I need to do that doesn't survive without open source. So if you're using Linux, then you're protected. I can't imagine they can force Linux to do anything. Okay, because these are communities. These are not specific companies. They are communities. So if you force somebody to do something, some other element will undo it, because they can. The source code is open. There's nothing to stop somebody in open source from saying, okay, I want to take responsibility for it. I'll recompile Linux without such and such. So you can recompile Linux and say, okay, I'm going to remove, if you know what modules are doing. Let's say that the government says, okay, Linus Torvalds, you got to put in client-side scanning, and you're forced to by law. And let's say Linus Torvalds does do that. I doubt, but let's say that he does do that. Then all you have to do is remove it. It's Linux. It's no big deal. This is not like Microsoft. You can remove stuff. You can disable things. If you know exactly which module it is, Linux, it's so easy. You just find the module, disable it. And once you disable the module, then it's not going to do anything. Okay, now you can't do that with Microsoft Windows. You can't do that with iOS. You can't do it with Google Android. You can't do it iOS, but you can do it open source. So if you're in the UK, the first thing you're going to do, and this may be all of us here at some point. This may be all of us at some point, but for now, if you're in the UK, you should go to Linux and you should use Android Open Source Project, or AOSP, meaning at the Google Found. You have to start using that, and then you will be exempt, and they will have so much time to figure out that. In fact, I don't know how they can figure it out, because there's always a way around it. There's always a way around it if it's open source. Somebody can always change it, and as long as the person changing is not in the UK, they're not going to know. So there's the trick, guys, that we need to start shifting activity. And I don't push you guys to say, okay, go to Linux now, because there's some of you that can't seem to handle that. But my goodness, this is the time to do it. I never thought that they would actually do this, but they did. They did. So yeah, it's going to take them a while to implement this, spy stuff. So if you're using open source platforms, open source only. Even Braxme is open source. Braxme is open source. So yeah, go open source and everything, and then then there's none of this like secret stuff that can go on, and then they're going to be stymied. I'm not sure how they're going to implement this. So basically, there's going to be two groups of people: the dummies, who are the normies, and the smart ones who listen to privacy channels like mine. We'll have two groups of communities, and then people will actually start detecting who am I talking to and what platform are you on. Before you even start a conversation, you say, well, I'm going to put a detector on you to see what kind of platform. By the way, you can do that. It's very easy. User agents. You can actually, on the internet, you can track user agents. And maybe you got to publish the user agent, and the user agent will reveal that you're running Windows or Mac OS or whatever. It's very easy to do. I mean, I track user agents all the time. So a user agent will tell you what platform the person is on talking to the server. And if they're on a platform that is going to be part of this environment where it's going to be government controlled and scanned, then we're going to say, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to talk to you. So yeah, guys, we need to start preparing here, because it's like changing so fast. And if you react at the last minute, there's still time here, but people have to adjust. And people will say, well, I don't know how to use Linux. I only know how to use Mac OS. Well, either stop using computers or figure it out. It's not that hard. Okay, unless you're doing something that's requiring rocket science, it's not really that hard. So most of the, most basic functions are easily handled in Linux. It's when you start going advanced that it gets more tricky. But for standard things, you want to just use it. And maybe the best distros to use, this will, just get used to Linux for a change. But as time goes by, you may have to be sensitive as to even which distro you use, because the more basic the distro, not represented by some big company, then the better you are. For example, Ubuntu is a big company, or Red Hat is a big company. So maybe you can't do that. You can't go Ubuntu or Red Hat. Maybe you got to go to a smaller company, so you're immune from somebody adding code just so they can protect themselves. So, there's 10 million distros, and if the distro name is different, then it is different. Just because it says Linux Mint doesn't mean it's one version of Mint. There's other versions, other forks of Mint. So and anything else. I mean, just about, you can take an existing OS and then fork it. So yeah, for example, if let's just say somebody made a version of Ubuntu that has spyware, because Ubuntu has a little bit of spyware in there. Then you fork Ubuntu and you take away the spyware, and then you publish it under a new name. In fact, Pop OS, which I use, it's my preferred. I like the look of Pop OS. Pop OS is, and the reason I like it is because it's very close to Ubuntu. It's actually based on Ubuntu. So, but they just remove some of the code, the Ubuntu code. So Ubuntu is very user friendly, because the drivers, they have the most drivers in there. So if you have an unusual device, you will find that Ubuntu likely supports it. Red Hat is another company that does all that. So if you have a fork of it, and anyone can fork it, like Pop OS, like I said, forked Ubuntu, and they can remove the code. Ubuntu does a check. There's a online check to see who's online. It's, what is it, check.ubuntu.com or something like that. I forget the actual domain. And of course, Pop OS doesn't have that. So you're getting the benefits of the compatibility of Ubuntu without using Ubuntu. That's why I like Pop OS, because I don't want to have to run a device and then the device doesn't work. So that's one thing there. Now, as you know, in the AOSP side, or Android open source, as long as there's no Google apps on there, it's good. So I don't really obviously we have Brax OS, and as you guys know, I've used Lineage OS and Calyx OS a lot, those two. as well as Brax OS, depending on the phone. So Brax OS is for Brax 2 phones. Calyx OS is great for Pixel phones. Lineage OS is great for everything because they have the most support. So all these are good options because they're based on AOSP. So most of the changes they've made to AOSP are all on the UI side, user interface side. In terms of structure, they're pretty much the same as AOSP. So yeah, even those strange communities running AOSP, like the crazy communities that begin with G, that they are pretty much AOSP. Some of the claims they make, like, oh, we do something really different. Oh yeah, right. When you actually look at it, they're just using basic features of AOSP, and then they hype the minor changes they do, and they call it something special. So in any case, so AOSP is open. You can go to the source code of AOSP, and I can look at it, and if there's any strange things going on, we can look at it and tell you, and then you can remove it yourself, or we can remove it for you. It's not a big deal. I can read the code. I'm a C programmer. I can read the code on Android open source project. I have read the code. I was looking for all the spyware, and obviously it doesn't exist because they removed it, or it was never there, because it's on the Google App side. They added in later, so that's not there. So we don't have that option. And the same, by the way, with Linux. You can look at go to linux.org and go look at the source code, and they can't really hide anything. It's all there. So if anybody puts in spyware, it'll be exposed. So you don't really have to worry about it. So that's my suggestion, folks. If we're going to do a defense, we're going to have to play this cat and mouse game. And the solution is to go with open source, Android open source project on phones, or otherwise I just generally call them the Google phones. Someday Linux mobile phones, someday. Not ready yet for prime time, but someday. I don't know when that someday will be. Not this year. For now, it's just AOSP. And then the other thing that we gotta do is do Linux. Is Android Java based? You can ask me those questions later, and we can go into detail. Because no, Android is not Java based. Although you code some of it in a Java appearing code, but it's not Java. So to run a Linux distro, you also need a user interface to go with it. No, to run a Linux distro, you choose the Linux distro with the user interface you like. So if you're going to use Ubuntu, for example, which is one of the most common, then that's it. Or let's say you want to make it look like Windows, you use Zorin. Zorin looks very much like Windows. So yeah. If you install a Zorin distro, it will be too close to Windows. It looks so much like it, and I for that reason I don't like Zorin, because I don't like to see Windows. So, but yeah, you whatever is closest to your heart, you can do it. Some of it looks like a Mac. It's up to you. You can choose whatever, and you're all set. So. Yeah, the distro, nowadays distros already have the graphical interface. So back in the day you had to add it, because there's actually a module you got to add to do the graphical interface. But that's included in the distro now. For example, one of the graphical user interfaces is like LXD or GNOME or one of those. So normally you add a desktop GUI to it, but it's included in most. In fact, I don't think anyone actually seriously considers a distro now without including a desktop GUI in it. So you don't have to do anything; just install it. So is Linux hard to install? A little tricky with new computers. with older computers it's a little easier, but with newer computers it's a little harder because they intentionally make it harder to do it. Anyway, we'll continue on, but before I do that, let me just pop a sponsor here. Hold on, let me just move it up because it's below. So yeah, so welcome guys to my sponsor. My sponsor is Linode. I wonder what happened to my, did I actually delete the Linode logo? Anyway, my sponsor is Linode, and Linode is a cloud service provider. So if you're looking for a server, for example, you want to run a website, you want to run WordPress, which is often run on Linux servers. You want to create your own. Some of you actually just want to play with Linux and just want to create a Linux server to do any kinds of things. So there's so many tools now. For example, you can make an online store with Linux. You can do so many things that you don't even have to write code for. You can just use some existing open source product, and you can do it on Linux. The question is how you do that. Well, you can't put a Linux server at your house to run a server. That's not going to work. You can't do that. The way you do it is you put it in a cloud server. And one of the cloud service providers is Linode. And it's one of the cheapest ones you can use and one of the best companies for inexpensive cloud servers that run Linux. They are actually focused on Linux, and although you can install other things, by default they make it really, really easy to put Linux servers on there, and they put Linux management tools, and you don't have to be so much of an expert to do this. Many people can do this for you fairly easily. And you can run your own servers for any number of things, websites included, even email and many other things. I, of course, run a lot of my stuff on Linux myself. In fact, my websites and my platform runs on a lot of it runs on Linode. Not all of it, but a lot of it runs on Linode. So if you use the code linode.com/Rob Braxman, they will give you $100 credit when you start with Linode. So when you're thinking about this, you sign up with Linode, use that code, and they'll give you $100 credit. Now, this is pretty amazing because let's say you want to learn how to use Linux and you don't know anything, because they install Linux for you. So it's actually easy. You just go to the server and say, give me a server with Ubuntu on it, and then they make it, and it's done. And then you say, well, I want to know put a website on it. Well, you can do that on your own, or you can say just preload WordPress on that server, and you just pick it from a list. Okay, so 007, it just some minor technology can do it. So you will find people who can do this very easily. It doesn't require some advanced skills. Some moderately able power users can do it. So you don't need a programmer type to do this. So anyway, you get $100 credit if you use that if you need a cloud server. Obviously, if that's not your thing, I'm not expecting everyone to be doing that. But it's something that if you're going to do it, then you might as well use the proper company. Okay, so somebody asked, and I want to answer that, so you can go figure it out. Is Android running Java? So no, Android is not Java. So real life Java requires a Java interpreter. And so as you know, many of you may be installing things that require Java code, and you install a Java interpreter on your device. In fact, you download it from Oracle and you install the latest version of Java for certain things to work. And then the code runs on your computer. Very common. That is actually has nothing to do with Android. Nothing. However, what Android did is if you want to run code for Android, so let's say you want to write a Android app, and they give you the Android Eclipse, the development platform for Android, and when you actually use a development platform for Android, they actually expect you to put in the code in a Java format. So you're actually writing code that looks like Java. Okay? So yes, it's Java looking code. Okay? But it doesn't get turned into actual Java code. It's actually, when you're running on Android, Android will actually convert that Java code into something called bytecode. And what that really means, for those of you who don't understand this, you might understand this if you have some knowledge of computers, is that Android is actually running apps in a virtual machine. So your apps actually are not running on the phone directly. Android supports apps. Any app you use, let's say even Signal or your VPN or whatever software you use, is not running natively on the device. They are running in a virtual machine. Okay, and that adds to the security. You cannot have code that can bypass the security of the virtual machine. So they can't, for example, go interrupt or spy on another app. Well, you can, but not directly. You can scan like network traffic, but you can't directly read content of another app. And the reason is they're isolated. They're running in virtual machines. They're running in separate processes. Okay, so that's so even though it looks like Java, that's the actual construction of Android, is that the apps you download from any of the stores, whether it be from F-Droid or from apkpure.com or even Google Store, they are written in a format that is called bytecode. So you download an APK file. You probably you see this all the time. You download an app for Android and it's an APK file format, and you're saying, so the programming code is in APK. That's the bytecode. No, APK is actually a compressed file, like a zip file. So the APK is a compressed file, and then when you run the APK, it unzips that, it puts that on the proper folders, and then the actual code is bytecode, and that is going to run only inside Android runtime. And that's what actually controls the apps. So the apps do not run on Android directly. They're all running inside Android runtime. So that's part of the security. So in order to make code for Android, to bypass Android to go to Linux directly, you have to write it in C. So Android is based on an old Linux kernel that's been modified. So you have to, if you want direct access to Android to bypass the security, you have to write it in C. Okay, and they don't provide a mechanism for a user to do that. You can only do that by recompiling the Android code. Okay, so that's part of how that works. So in any case, the point is that when you are running an Android open source project, you get delivered you compile it, it creates all the executables, and the apps run outside of that. The apps are not part of this. Android open source does not include the apps. Android open source, they may deliver apps with it, but it's not part of it. It may be just part of the user interface, but the actual Android open source project does not include the apps. The Android open source project includes Android runtime. It includes all the internal processes that are really parts of the Linux kernel. The Linux kernel in Android, which is different. It's not the same as the mainline Linux you use on a computer. That is actually controlled by Android open source, not by Linus Torvalds at Linux. So they're two different entities. They're not merged. They got forked and they're all going in a separate direction, and they're trying to bring them closer, but they're actually separate. So they copy stuff from each other to make sure that the Android is not that far from the main Linux, but that's what it's based on. It was actually forked from an original Linux. Okay, so anyway, I just want you to understand what I'm talking about here, and that is, there is a way to fight back. It requires us to change. I made a video that many of you didn't find it too interesting, but I was trying to make a point that the opposition is not a bunch of dummies. They know what they're doing, and you don't get to be a highly paid data scientist because you're stupid. So the data scientists are all trying to come up with a way to capture your data, and I'm teaching you ways to avoid that. And obviously we got to be smart too, because we got to find a way that they haven't figured out or can't figure it out because it's not part of what they're able to do. So that's why I was telling you about how you have to understand what the world is like, that the opposition, the data scientists of Google are doing things against you, and they're not your normal opposition. They're much more skilled, and so we got to work. I mean, it's not. Some of you are saying, "I don't want to go through this. It's too much work." Well, then go join the normies. We can't help everyone, unfortunately. We can't help everyone. There's going to be two classes of people here, and I tried to, something I want to tell you guys. So I recently I had an interview with Brian Lunduke. So Brian Lunduke is a well-known Linux guy. He's well-known in the Linux community. He's probably the voice of Linux. And he interviewed me. And as we were having a private discussion, I didn't know that he knew me, and as we were having a private discussion, not in the broadcast, he referred to me as the subversive, so as the subversive nerd. So over time, I'm trying to act like I'm mainstream. I'm trying to act like I'm mainstream, that I can, I'm trying to be friendly to everyone. I'm trying to go, I see all these comments from people on my YouTube videos, and, I get hurt when I see a comment that's saying I'm I'm paranoid, or, that kind of comment, very typical. And then I started thinking to myself about what Brian Lunduke called me, and said, "You're subversive." So yeah, let's face it, I gotta accept what I am. That my group, all of you here, and not just me, but others in similar communities with privacy-oriented people on YouTube communities and elsewhere, that we are also subversives. And we're not mainstream, and so I'm not gonna expect to be mainstream. I'm not gonna be Linus Tech Tips. I mean, this is clear. This is clearly, and some of you say he's just there to make money, and I'm laughing to myself. And I'm telling you right now, there is no chance for me to make big money, because I am never going to be a Linus Tech Tips. That is not what I am. I just have to accept that. Okay? I am not going to be Linus Tech Tips. I'm always going to be in a subversive crowd. because there's the normie crowd and then there's subversive crowd. So the normies are going to be the Google. So who would ever thought that I have to be a subversive to a Google? And yeah, but that's reality. That's what we're faced with. And so yes, I can't convince everyone. And you know what? We don't have to, and I don't have to bother with that. And I don't really to care that I support everyone. And some of you are like say, well, he's just trying to sell products. Well, I don't need to care about that. I don't need to care, because obviously I'm always going to be in a small group. Yeah, that's exactly what 416 Shovel said. We just want to be left alone. I'm just part of a subversive group that just want to be zucking left alone. Is that so hard? Okay, the signal dropped there for a moment, but okay, let me James Lynch hasn't subscribed to LTT. So I don't know what I got cut off. I don't know what got cut off. But anyway. Yeah, so anyway, it's just it's just so hard to just have a simple demand, and that we just zucking want to be left alone. Why is that such a major request? And I'm going to tell you, there's so much spyware, spy tools, and spy technologies out there, and so if they really want to catch terrorists and they want to catch any number of people, if you exert the right amount of effort, you can catch anyone. But they're not trying to do that. They're trying to say, well, we don't want to work. We don't want to work at capturing anyone the hard way, the usual way, using things like, let me tell you some really dangerous words like investigation. Oh, you can't do that anymore. You can't do investigations. No, we're just going to do mass surveillance because that's easier. Mass surveillance. So, yeah, so I'm a subversive, and if you're in this channel, you're probably interested in also being a subversive, because you're like saying, enough is enough. I want to be left alone too. So if you want to be left alone, then yeah, guys, let's plan this out. Let's not come up with, let's not say, oh, I'm too lazy. If you're going to be lazy and you don't want to be subversive, okay, then just be on the outside and just go watch an occasional video. And yeah, because even, I have 400,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and what 130,000 elsewhere. So over 500,000 followers all over social media. And it's a very small number, and even that number, many of those people are not really ready to be subversives. How is that spelled? Subversive. Everyone's spelling it for you. Subversive. So yeah, subversives are like they're the anti-government groups typically, but this is not about government. We want to be subversives against normies, against normie beliefs and normie systems. Meaning the big step, the big tech stuff. So this is not about being subversive with government. Radical, we don't even have to be radical. I mean, it's not really, how are we radical when we just want to be left alone? That's not radical. Radicals are out there, demonstrating and creating violence and all that. That's not us. Subversives can be doing it quietly. So yeah, we just want to be left alone. So we can't really be labeled as radical, but we understand what's going on and we don't want to be part of it. So do you really want to be part of this CDBC things? What is it? CBDC. See, can't even get the letters right. CBDC. So yeah, is that necessary? How do you use your catch your man in the middle tool? You can figure it out even without my tool, Kevin, because the tool doesn't run on not allowed to run on certain platforms. So you can manually compare certificates to see if they're faking the certificate. Yeah, I suppose I could make another video explaining how that works. And the problem is you can't really compare certificates on iOS. They don't show you on the browser. I don't know why they hide the certificate on the browser. They should actually show you the certificate and you can do a comparison. So you can't really, on Android, on iOS, there's no actual way to tell if somebody's doing something illegal by, doing fake certificates. Yeah, WorldCoin. I'm not really following that, so. Yeah. So anyway, the main point to being a subversive is that I don't need to cater to all. I don't need to cater to all. So it's not necessary for me to appeal to everyone. I just have to be direct to the people who understand and want to be left alone. Like, I'm not going to cater to my relatives. I mean, you should see my family. I mean, it took me so much effort to even get them to be on Signal. And as they are on Signal, they're passing messages on Zucking Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp. So yeah, they're destroying my privacy on the side, even though they're clearly on Signal. So I'm not going to worry about people like that. I mean, there's only so much we can do in the world here. So yeah, so it is. We are. Okay, the video froze here. I can see the video froze, but it's actually okay. If I interrupt this, it's going to. If I interrupt the broadcast to get the video running, it's going to disconnect. So how am I going to do this? You see, on YouTube, on Rumble it's going to be fine, but on YouTube it's going to. What's going to happen on YouTube is it's going to create a new. It's going to create a new session here, a new broadcast. So, okay, so I'm going to stop it. It may disconnect if you're on YouTube, and you may have to sign back in. So, fortunately, it's a full hour here of a broadcast. So if you want to stop here, you can. But yeah, it doesn't matter. You got a full hour here of discussion, and this is a nice stopping point. And I'll reconnect here. And so if you're on YouTube and it stops for too long, it may require you to relog to exit and come back in. Okay, so here we go. So be right back. Now on Rumble you don't have to do anything, just refresh the screen. It should be. Okay, so let's see what happened here. So did it So, you two people, is it back? So Rumble's going to be fine. Did it go back on YouTube without setting up a new thing? Okay. Okay, and it didn't create a new session? It didn't create a new... Okay, so I guess the question is, it didn't create a new session. So it continued the broadcast. Okay, hopefully that's all that happened here, because it was pretty quick. So, okay. Title's the same, thank goodness. Okay, good. Okay. It depends on how long the delay is, and I had to do it twice, so I was kind of worried it was going to get screwed up. So it looks like I had to, so it looks like OBS crashed. Okay, so OBS crashed, and it basically stopped the video, but everything else was okay, including the sound. The sound was okay. So anyway, as I said, I think that we have to admit that this is a special group of people that come here, and we're not normies, and we better just accept that if you want to be left alone, you got to fight for it. It's not going to be. It's not going to be. It's still. Yep, it's still 55.5 minutes in. Yeah, right. That we're not normies, and we just have to accept the fact that it's not going to be that simple to be a subversive. You gotta, if you want to be left alone, you gotta kind of fight to get left alone. This is some of the stuff I'm teaching here. Browser isolation isn't that simple, because it's a discipline. It's not that it's hard, but it's got to be something you remember. And yet it's so effective. It's so effective. Browser isolation is something I invented. I think I invented it 10 years ago now. 9 years ago, I think. I lost track. But when I found out what they were doing with browser fingerprinting, I said, how do you get around this? How do you get around this? And so knowing the technology, I said, I know how to solve this. We isolate it by having multiple browsers. Now, they're trying to come up with a way where one browser spies on another browser. So the game isn't over, but if it's an open source browser, it's not going to do that. So, for example, Brave is an open source browser. Then you don't really have this issue of a Brave spying on Chrome. Now, Chrome may spy on Brave, though, so you have the opposite problem. That's possible to do. So, this is not yet there, but just imagine that it may happen. So this, it's a hard battle. So if you actively understand what I'm trying to do here, it's always changing. The battleground is always changing. You can't just assume that you do a few things and everything is all set. Now, obviously, there's some things that are so effective that they really do a pretty good job without you having to do anything. And one of those is to use an AOSP device. Now, some of you are saying, oh, you just say that because you're trying to sell me one. I don't care. You can make one. The majority of you don't buy from me. Only a small proportion buy stuff from me, which enough to sustain the channel, but not enough to write home about. I mean, it's not like I'm going to be Linus Tech Tips here. It's not going to happen. But whatever solution you get with Android open source project, if you buy it from me or from somebody else, I mean, hopefully you buy it from me just to support the channel, but for that reason alone, not because there's some technical advantage to buying the same thing from me versus somebody else. I mean, it's technically speaking, as far as effectiveness, if you use an AOSP fork, any one of those, Lineage OS, Calyx OS, etc., Brax OS, it really does make you invisible to Google. I mean, this is probably the easiest thing to do, and I have to tell you that it's so effective. And one of the things that it really does is it takes off the Google ID, which is the number one tracker in the universe. Okay, the Google ID. You know, it's almost like I mean, it's almost like godlike in its ability to track you. The Google ID. And with a simple thing like a AOSP phone, you're suddenly deprived of this love of, Google. With such a simple move. Some of you are saying, "Oh, I have a if I use a Brax phone or the Google Pixel phone or whatever it is that you offer, does that mean we got to learn something and we got to do something different?" And the actual reality is that you don't have to do anything different. What you can't do on the phone is what's protecting you. For example, you can't run Google, you can't do Google Drive, Google Maps, Google Gmail. You can't run those on a Google phone, and that's it. Because you can't run those, you're safe. There is no way to do unsafe things on a Google phone. So it's really that simple. Because the phone itself is made to not send data to anyone, not to Google. So none of the telemetry, none of that works. None of that works. So without doing anything, it doesn't require any advanced tech skills to be a subversive. It's just a desire to say, hey, I'm going to make sacrifices. Because what is the real sacrifice to using a Google phone? Well, not all apps work. Not all apps work. So some of you will say, well, darn it, if I'm not going to use, name your favorite app, Google Maps, then the world has ended. I can't use this. It's not going to work. Now, some of you say, no, I understand the limitations is that, we can't use every app because some of the apps are unsafe. So what can we use instead? Well, there are options. There's, Magic Earth. There's open source Osmand, open source maps. There are options. And if anything, that's all you have to do is learn what the options are, and the world will continue to rotate, even though some of you think it's flat. Okay, think what you want, but yeah, when you use the Google phone, you don't have to do anything. The world continues on. The world continues on. And you just have to adapt. And if you're not willing to adapt, then you're not going to be subversive. Okay, got it. You're not going to be a subversive. Well, you can, at least keep an eye on us here, because, I know you're not willing to make the jump because you believe in being a normie, and if that's the case, then okay, then I'm not going to try to convince you. Maybe stay over there, and at some point you're going to say you just want to be left alone, and then you just join the subversive group and say, okay, I'm going to make the move. I'm going to make a move. And the simplest move, of course, that I've talked to you about, and again, I don't care if you buy it or not. Build your own, whatever you want to do. Have somebody else make it for you, or get it from me. Yes, that's an option. But if you're, oh my gosh, the camera shut down again. Okay. So that means I'm crashing. OBS here. So looks like I have to redo the reboot here of the OBS. It's just I just reboot OBS, so restart OBS, so it's fairly quick. So anyway, I'll do it in a moment, but it's just a matter of if if you're willing to say, hey, I understand that we have to be a subversive to do this, or we're just going to be run over. If you want to be run over, then don't do anything. So it's that simple. Okay, so let me just. It doesn't take much more than a moment. So just you may have to just refresh, and I'll restart my camera again and restart OBS. So okay, here we go. See, doesn't take long. And we're back on. Nothing surprising happened here. Okay. So yeah, so OBS is crashing twice now. Wonder why. OBS is open source, by the way, so I can use it. I'm running Linux here. So please, regarding the tracking and invasive invasion of privacy, could you please explain IEEE iBiosensors 802.15 using mesh networks BLE for ICC and IBC? Is no one talking about this? I'm not familiar with that, so I mean, I understand the technologies you just mentioned. Certainly, I understand Bluetooth mesh networks and biosensors. I understood all that. I don't know what that specific thing is. So, yeah, I tried to explain, for example, biometrics to you guys, and how certain use of biometrics is not actually biometrics. So, yeah, not everything is, just because it uses the term biosensor doesn't mean it's biometric. You actually have to study the code and see what's actually doing. So the login system to FIDO2 that's being integrated into multiple platforms is not really biometric. So that is not, that particular one, FIDO2 is not a biometric. It's RSA based, and so you gotta look at it piece by piece. So some are biometric based, some are not. So the FIDO2, the one that's going to allow you to log into Google just by using the fingerprint sensor on your phone. Fingerprint sensors on phones are not actually biometric. Okay, Windows Hello in fact, any fingerprint sensor is on hardware is not actually biometric. Okay, so you may worry more about Face ID, because even if it's not biometric, it could be turned into a biometric, but it's not a biometric. No, they cannot reconstruct your fingerprint from RSA. No. Why is it not biometric? Because the hardware doesn't actually create a biometric, it just creates a number. So the phone, it's safe to use fingerprint on your phones. It's safe to do that. It is not biometric. It just creates a small grid of numbers. It's actually a very small grid, like 120 by 120, something like that. And you can't recreate a fingerprint from that because they're just past a hash. It's not. There's no way you can reconstruct a fingerprint from a biometric. And it's actually dependent on the device, meaning a a fingerprint sensor on one device is not compatible with the data to a fingerprint sensor on another device. It's device specific because the specs are different. So when you're logging into Google with a fingerprint sensor, it has really nothing to do with fingerprint. What they're doing is saying, let me validate that you're the same person. That's all they're trying to do. Are you the same guy that registered? So they get a numerical value from the fingerprint, its capacitance value, and if it's the same value because they compute it from the tiny grid, then they just confirm to Google that yes, the OS confirms that you're the same person. And then the OS confirms you're the same person by resending the same RSA certificate, which was pre-downloaded at the beginning of the transaction when you sign up with Google. So biometrics are never exchanged, so that really has nothing to do with anything. So is the bad economy affecting you too? Yeah, I'm sure, BA, because when people stop buying things, then of course they stop buying things from me too. Can they reconstruct your fingerprint from a high resolution photo? Yeah, they can, just a guy 69, but they can't do it from a fingerprint sensor. From a photo, yes. So what are these fake certificates all about? Are there videos explaining it? Yes. I have several videos explaining that, and the one video that explains certificates in general is the one that's recent and then nobody watched, called RSA. Okay, so that's a recent video. That's a month ago. RSA, it's a recent video. Go watch that, and it teaches about what RSA is. If I posted a picture holding something and my fingerprint was visible in the photo, yes, that is possible. Just the guy 69, yes. That actually was, yeah, that's possible. So it got to be high resolution though, obviously. So if it's not high resolution, then they're not going to be able to do it. Like here on this, you know, this is not a high resolution broadcast, so there's not enough points here to get a fingerprint. It's got to be, you know, fairly high resolution. I don't know what the resolution has to be, but if you're going to do it like on a 4K video, I mean, your fingerprint has to be pretty much occupying the whole screen. So I already told you Minoli Vision. There are already many videos on it. I have several. So start with the RSA video. Start with that. That's the most recent one. Okay. The government already has your fingerprints. The government already has all of our fingerprints. But, you know, have you ever heard of this one? Some of you are worried about fingerprints and you actually don't even realize that there are devices that can capture your DNA. Slammins, I don't use Verizon. I don't like Verizon. So that's good to know. Of course, all of them are compromised. I'm not sure what you're saying. Is there anything that's not compromised? We lost the video again, huh? Well, we're just in the last 15 minutes, so maybe we don't have to worry about that. Do you know if you can put all your favorite game servers on Linode? I don't have no idea how to do a game server. Is AT&T better? You have to use Verizon yourself. I use T-Mobile mostly. So yeah. So I'm okay with that. They're not zucking me as much as AT&T and Verizon. So Adam, let's see. I prefer T-Mobile overall. T-Mobile. The reason I prefer T-Mobile is because they're not very picky on the hardware. So I don't know if you know this, and I know you can't see my moving face here, but T-Mobile, AT&T requires some payola to accept a new phone. So for example, our Brax 3 phone, when that gets released, is going to be fine on T-Mobile. They've already accepted it. So we don't have to change IMEIs for T-Mobile, but we have to play around with AT&T because they don't accept it. So AT&T doesn't accept it because they don't allow the IMEI. So, crazy stuff. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to bother with rebooting. Maybe we'll see. I mean, yeah, there's a pause here, so I guess I can do it. So hang on just for a second. Doesn't take long.